The dust swirled around Victoria Sawyer's boots as she stood at the corral fence, watching the black stallion charge from one end to the other, his eyes wild with something beyond fear, beyond anger, something that looked almost like despair. The late afternoon sun beat down on San Francisco in the summer of 1878, and she could feel the sweat trickling down her spine beneath her simple cotton dress. But she didn't move, didn't flinch, just watched that magnificent creature throw himself against the boundaries of his prison, as if he could break through sheer force of will alone. "You might as well stop staring at that devil horse, Miss Sawyer," came a rough voice from behind her. "He's killed one man already and near about crippled two others. The boss is talking about putting him down come morning." Victoria turned to see Tom Jenkins, one of the older ranch hands, shaking his grizzled head. The Copper Creek Ranch sprawled across the hills outside San Francisco, one of the largest operations in Northern California, and she had only been here 3 weeks, hired on to help with the cooking and laundry after her father had died and left her with nothing but debts. But in those 3 weeks, she had heard the stories about this horse, brought in from the wild ranges of Nevada, supposedly the finest specimen anyone had ever seen, with bloodlines that promised speed and strength and endurance. Yet no one could get near him without risking life and limb. "What's his name?" she asked quietly, her green eyes still fixed on the stallion. "Hasn't got one. Just been calling him the Black Devil or sometimes just Devil. Why waste a good name on a horse that's bound for a bullet?" "Every creature deserves a name," Victoria said, and something in her voice made Tom pause. "You're not thinking of doing something foolish, are you, Miss Sawyer? Because I've seen men with 20 years of horse experience get thrown by that beast. A young woman like yourself wouldn't stand a chance." Victoria was 22 years old, and she had been around horses her entire life. Her father had been a farrier before the drink took him, and she had learned from him how to read the language of horses, how to see past the surface behavior to the pain or fear that drove it. This stallion wasn't mean. He was terrified. "I won't do anything foolish," she promised Tom, but she didn't promise not to do anything at all. That evening, after the dinner dishes were washed and put away, after the ranch hands had settled into their bunkhouse, and the main house had gone dark, Victoria slipped out of the small cabin she shared with 2 other women who worked on the ranch. The moon was nearly full, casting silver light across the landscape, and she carried a lantern in one hand and a bucket in the other. Inside the bucket was an old blanket, some carrots from the kitchen garden, and a curry brush that had belonged to her father. The stallion stood at the far end of the corral, his black coat gleaming in the moonlight, his head high and alert as she approached. She could see the whites of his eyes, see the tension in every line of his body, ready to explode into violence or flight at the slightest provocation. Victoria set down the lantern and the bucket outside the fence and simply stood there. She didn't try to climb over, didn't reach out her hand, didn't make any move toward him at all. She just stood and let him see her, let him understand that she was there but not threatening, present but not demanding. "Hello," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know you're scared. I know you don't trust anyone here and you have good reason. But I want you to know that I see you, not the devil everyone else sees, but you, whatever your real spirit is beneath all that fear." The stallion's ears flicked forward, then back, then forward again. He snorted and pawed the ground, but he didn't charge, didn't scream his rage into the night. He just watched her with those dark, liquid eyes. Victoria stayed for an hour that first night, just talking to him in that same soft voice, telling him about her father, about growing up poor but happy until the whiskey changed everything, about the grief of losing the only family she had ever known, about the strange loneliness of being a woman alone in the world with nothing but her wits and her willingness to work. She told him things she had never told another living soul, and somehow it felt safe because he was a horse and couldn't judge her, couldn't betray her confidences, could only listen or not listen as he chose. When she finally picked up her lantern and bucket and turned to go, she could have sworn the stallion took one step closer to the fence, as if he didn't want her to leave. The next night she came back, and the night after that. On the fourth night, she climbed over the fence and sat down in the dirt, still keeping a good 20 feet between herself and the horse, still making no demands, no aggressive moves. She brought more carrots and left them in a small pile halfway between them, then retreated to her spot and continued her quiet monologue. "You need a proper name," she told him. "Something strong and beautiful like you are. What about midnight? No, too common. Shadow, storm." She studied him thoughtfully. "Perseus. That's what I'll call you. Perseus, the hero from the old Greek stories my mother used to tell me. He was brave and strong and wouldn't let anyone tell him what he couldn't do." The stallion, Perseus now, stretched his neck toward the pile of carrots. He sniffed the air, tested it for danger, then cautiously moved forward. His eyes never left Victoria, and she could see every muscle in his body coiled tight, ready to bolt at the first sign of a trap. But she sat perfectly still, hardly breathing, and after a long moment he lowered his head and crunched one of the carrots between his strong teeth. Victoria felt tears prick her eyes. It was such a small thing, but it was everything. It was the first step, the first moment of trust in what would have to be a long journey. She kept coming every night, and slowly, incrementally, Perseus began to accept her presence. By the end of the second week, he would eat from her hand, though he still shied away if she moved too quickly, or if she tried to touch him anywhere except his soft nose. By the end of the third week, she could stand beside him and run her hand down his neck, feeling the tremors that ran through him, the effort it took for him to suppress his instinct to flee. "You're doing so well," she whispered to him one night, her fingers tangled gently in his mane. "You're so brave, Perseus, so much braver than you know." "Well, I'll be damned." Victoria spun around, her heart leaping into her throat. A man stood just outside the corral fence, his tall frame silhouetted against the moonlight. She could see the shape of his cowboy hat, the broad line of his shoulders, but his face was in shadow. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to startle you," the man said, and his voice was deep and warm with just a hint of surprise in it. "I've been watching for the past few minutes, and I couldn't quite believe what I was seeing." "Who are you?" Victoria asked, trying to keep the tremor out of her voice. Perseus had tensed beside her, and she kept one hand on his neck, trying to soothe him. "Name's Grant Foster," the man said, climbing over the fence with an easy grace that spoke of years in the saddle. "I'm the foreman here at Copper Creek. Just got back from driving a herd up to the northern pastures, been gone about a month." He stopped a respectful distance away, clearly aware that coming closer might spook the horse. "I heard about this stallion, heard the boss was planning to destroy him, but I never heard anything about someone actually making progress with him." "His name is Perseus," Victoria said, lifting her chin a little defiantly. "And he's not a devil or a killer. He's just scared." Grant Foster moved closer, and now Victoria could see his face in the lantern light. He was probably around 27 or 28, with strong, clean features, dark hair that curled a bit at the edges, and gray eyes that looked almost silver in the moonlight. There was something about the way he moved, calm and confident but not aggressive, that reminded her of the way she had learned to move around horses. "May I?" he asked, gesturing toward Perseus. "Slowly," Victoria cautioned. Grant approached with the same patient care Victoria had used, extending his hand for Perseus to sniff, waiting for the horse to make the first move toward contact. When Perseus finally allowed him to stroke his neck, Grant let out a low whistle. "This is remarkable," he said, his voice full of genuine wonder. "I've been working with horses my whole life, and I've never seen anyone gentle a wild stallion like this, especially not one with his reputation. Miss Sawyer, Victoria Sawyer, I work in the kitchen here." "Well, Miss Sawyer, you have a gift for this." Grant's eyes met hers over Perseus's back, and she felt something shift in the air between them, something electric and unexpected. "A real gift. Where did you learn to work with horses like this?" "My father was a farrier. He taught me to listen to what horses are trying to tell you, not just what people say about them." "Your father was a wise man." Grant continued to stroke Perseus's neck, and the stallion, remarkably, seemed to accept his touch. "How long have you been working with him?" "About 3 weeks now. I come out every night after my work is done." "Every night," Grant repeated thoughtfully. "That kind of dedication, that kind of patience, it's rare. Most people want quick results, want to break a horse's spirit to make him compliant. But what you're doing, this is different. You're building trust, building a real partnership." Victoria felt a warmth spread through her chest at his words. No one had ever really understood her approach to horses before, certainly not her father, who had loved the animals but had still seen them primarily as tools for work. But this man, this stranger with the silver-gray eyes, he seemed to understand instinctively what she was trying to do. "The ranch owner was planning to have him shot," she said quietly. "Tomorrow morning, that's what Tom Jenkins told me." Grant's jaw tightened. "Henry Cooper, the owner, he's a businessman first and a rancher second. He sees a problem, he wants it eliminated. But he's also reasonable, and he respects results. If I tell him you can gentle this horse, make him safe to ride and work with, he'll listen." He paused, studying her intently. "That is, if you want to keep working with Perseus. It would mean spending even more time with him, probably during the day when other people are around, when you should be doing your regular work." "I'll do whatever it takes," Victoria said without hesitation. "I won't let them kill him just because no one else had the patience to understand him." A slow smile spread across Grant's face, transforming his serious features into something almost boyish. "Then we'd better get to work. I'll talk to Mr. Cooper first thing in the morning, let him know what's happening. In the meantime, I'd like to work with you and Perseus if you'll have me. 2 people can accomplish more than one, and if we can get him saddle broken within a few weeks, it'll go a long way toward convincing Cooper he's worth keeping." "I'd appreciate the help," Victoria admitted. "And I think Perseus might take to you. He seems to sense that you respect him." "Horses always know," Grant agreed. "They can read people better than people can read each other most of the time." They worked together in comfortable silence for a while longer, both of them touching Perseus, letting him grow accustomed to the presence of 2 humans instead of just one. Victoria found herself acutely aware of Grant's proximity, the way his shoulder sometimes brushed against hers as they moved around the horse, the way his hands moved with such confidence and gentleness at the same time. "Where did you learn to work with horses?" she asked after a while, curious about this man who seemed to understand so much. "My father had a ranch in Wyoming," Grant said. "Smaller operation than this, but we raised and trained horses for the cavalry, for ranchers, for anyone who needed a good, solid mount. I grew up in the saddle, spent more time with horses than with people for most of my childhood." He smiled a little ruefully. "Probably made me better with animals than with humans, to be honest." "I understand that," Victoria said softly. "People are so much more complicated, so much harder to read." "Not you, though," Grant said, and there was something in his voice that made her look up at him sharply. "You're easy to read, Miss Sawyer. You wear your heart right there on your face, every emotion clear as day. It's refreshing, actually. Most people spend so much energy hiding what they really feel. Victoria felt her cheeks heat, and she was grateful for the darkness that hid her blush. I've never been very good at pretending. That's not a weakness, Grant said firmly. That's a strength. The world needs more honest people, more people willing to show who they really are. They talked for another hour, sharing stories about their lives, their experiences with horses, their dreams for the future. Victoria learned that Grant had come to California 3 years ago, looking for new opportunities, new challenges. He had worked his way up from ranch hand to foreman through sheer determination and skill, and he had dreams of someday owning his own ranch, his own herd. It's harder than I thought it would be, saving enough money, he admitted. I send some home to my mother every month. She's widowed now and living with my sister's family. And land prices just keep going up, especially anywhere with good water and grazing. But you'll do it, Victoria said with certainty. I can tell you're the kind of person who doesn't give up on what he wants. Is that so? Grant's eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled. And what about you, Miss Sawyer? What do you want? Victoria considered the question, one hand still resting on Perseus's warm shoulder. What did she want? A month ago she would have said security, a roof over her head, enough food to eat. But now, standing here in the moonlight with this horse who had begun to trust her, and this man who seemed to see her as something more than just a kitchen worker, she wanted more. I want to work with horses, she said slowly, testing the words as she spoke them. Really work with them, not just as a hobby or something I do in secret at night. I want to help animals like Perseus, the ones everyone else has given up on. I want to prove that there's always hope, always a chance for healing and trust, if you're just willing to put in the time and care. Then that's what you should do, Grant said simply, as if it were the easiest thing in the world. You have a gift, Victoria. It would be a shame to waste it in a kitchen. It was the first time he had used her given name, and the sound of it in his deep voice sent a shiver down her spine that had nothing to do with the cool night air. Over the next few weeks, Victoria and Grant worked with Perseus every day. True to his word, Grant had convinced Henry Cooper to give them time to prove the stallion could be gentled and trained, though the ranch owner had made it clear his patience was limited. If they couldn't show significant progress within a month, Perseus would still be destroyed. The pressure pushed them to work harder, spend more time together, and in the process, Victoria found herself falling for Grant in a way she had never fallen for anyone before. It wasn't just his handsome face or his strong, capable hands, though those certainly didn't hurt. It was the way he listened when she talked, really listened, as if her words mattered. It was the way he deferred to her judgment with Perseus, recognizing that she had built the foundation of trust with the horse and respecting that bond. It was the way he looked at her sometimes, when he thought she wasn't paying attention, with an expression that was equal parts admiration and something deeper, something that made her heart race. They progressed from touching Perseus to introducing him to a rope halter, then to leading him around the corral, then to brushing him and cleaning his hooves. Each step was a negotiation, a conversation between human and animal, and Victoria marveled at how Perseus responded to patience and respect after so many people had tried to dominate him through force. You were right about him, Grant said one afternoon as they watched Perseus trot freely around the corral, clearly enjoying the exercise. He's not mean, he's not crazy. He was just scared and probably in pain too. Did you see those scars on his back legs? Someone tried to rope him rough, probably dragged him before they got him in here. No wonder he wanted to kill anyone who came near him. People don't think about what animals have been through, Victoria said, her voice tight with anger at whoever had hurt Perseus. They just see a behavior they don't like and decide the animal is bad, without ever asking why the behavior is happening. Not everyone thinks like you do, Grant said quietly. He was standing close to her at the fence, close enough that she could smell the scent of leather and sage and something uniquely him. Not everyone has your capacity for compassion. She turned to look at him and found his face inches from hers, his gray eyes intense and searching. For a moment, she thought he might kiss her, and her breath caught in her throat, anticipation and nervousness warring in her chest. But then Tom Jenkins called out from across the yard, asking Grant to come look at a problem with one of the wagon wheels, and the moment was broken. Grant stepped back, clearing his throat. I should go deal with that, but Victoria, I want you to know. He paused, seeming to struggle with his words. I want you to know that working with you these past few weeks, it's been the best part of my days. You're an extraordinary woman. He walked away before she could respond, leaving her standing at the fence with her heart pounding and her thoughts in chaos. Did he feel the same way she did? Was there really something growing between them? Or was she just imagining it, projecting her own feelings onto him? Perseus came to the fence and nuzzled her shoulder as if sensing her confusion. She stroked his nose absently, grateful for his solid, uncomplicated presence. What do I do? She whispered to the horse. What if I'm wrong about him? What if I'm just another foolish girl falling for a man who doesn't feel the same way? Perseus had no answers, but his steady breathing and warm presence helped calm her racing thoughts. Whatever happened between her and Grant, she still had the satisfaction of helping this magnificent animal heal and learn to trust again. That had to be enough, but deep down, she knew it wasn't enough anymore. She wanted more. She wanted Grant. The next major step in Perseus's training was getting him accustomed to wearing a saddle. Victoria approached this with the same patience she had shown in every other stage, first letting him sniff and investigate the saddle blanket, then draping it over his back for just a few seconds before removing it. Grant watched from the side of the corral, ready to intervene if needed but trusting Victoria to read Perseus's signals. "You're a natural at this," he called out after Victoria had successfully placed the blanket on Perseus's back and left it there for a full minute while the horse stood, tense but not panicking. "I've seen experienced trainers make a mess of this step, push too hard too fast. But you know exactly how much he can handle." Victoria glowed under his praise, even as she kept her focus on Perseus. "It's not about what I want him to do, it's about what he's ready for. There's a difference." "That's the gift," Grant said, climbing into the corral to join her. Not everyone understands that difference. They worked together to progress from the blanket to the saddle itself, first letting Perseus examine it thoroughly, then placing it on his back without cinching it, then finally, after several days of preparation, securing it properly. Perseus danced and sidestepped, clearly uncomfortable with the weight and strangeness of it, but he didn't buck or bolt. He trusted Victoria and, by extension, Grant, enough to tolerate this new experience. "That's my good boy," Victoria murmured, stroking his neck and offering him pieces of apple as a reward. "You're so brave, Perseus, so strong and brave." "Now comes the hard part," Grant said, his hand resting on the saddle, "getting him to accept a rider." They both knew this was the step where everything could fall apart. A horse might tolerate a saddle but still refuse to allow a human on its back, especially a horse that had been traumatized. And if Perseus reacted violently to someone trying to ride him, all their progress could be undone in an instant. "I'll do it," Victoria said firmly. "I should be the first one to ride him. He trusts me most." Grant frowned, and she could see the concern in his eyes. Victoria, if he bucks you off, you could be seriously hurt. Let me do it. I've been thrown more times than I can count. I know how to fall. And I know how to ride, Victoria countered. My father put me on a horse before I could walk. I'm not helpless, Grant. I know you're not helpless, Grant said, frustration creeping into his voice. That's not what I'm saying. I just don't want to see you get hurt. Why? The question came out more sharply than Victoria intended. Why do you care so much if I get hurt? Grant stared at her, and something in his expression shifted, became raw and vulnerable. Because I care about you, he said, his voice low and intense. Because somewhere in the past few weeks, I stopped being able to imagine my days without you in them. Because when I watch you work with Perseus, when I see your dedication and your compassion and your strength, I think you might be the most remarkable person I've ever met. Is that enough of a reason? Victoria felt like all the air had been sucked out of her lungs. She stared at Grant, at this strong, capable man who was looking at her like she hung the moon and stars, and she couldn't find words to respond. I know I shouldn't have said that, Grant continued, running a hand through his dark hair in agitation. I know you work here and I'm the foreman, and there are all kinds of reasons why this is complicated. But I can't keep pretending I don't feel what I feel. I can't keep watching you risk yourself without telling you that if something happened to you, it would break something in me. Grant, Victoria whispered. And then she was moving toward him, closing the distance between them, and his arms came around her like it was the most natural thing in the world. She tilted her face up to his, and when his lips met hers, it was like lightning and thunder and coming home all at once. The kiss was everything she had imagined and more. Grant kissed her like she was precious, like she was worth cherishing, and she poured all her own feelings into kissing him back, trying to tell him without words what she hadn't been brave enough to say out loud. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Grant rested his forehead against hers. I should have asked permission before I did that. I would have said yes, Victoria assured him, her hands still fisted in his shirt. I would have said yes to anything you asked. Then will you let me be the first one to ride Perseus? Grant asked, pulling back to look at her seriously. Please, Victoria, let me do this one thing to keep you safe. She wanted to argue, wanted to insist that she was capable and strong and didn't need protecting. But she could see the genuine fear in his eyes, the real concern, and she realized that letting him do this wasn't about her being weak. It was about him needing to feel like he could protect someone he cared about, someone who had become important to him. All right, she said softly. But I'll be right here, and if Perseus seems too distressed, you get off immediately. Agreed, Grant said, relief clear on his face. He kissed her again, quickly this time, then turned his attention to the horse. They spent the next week preparing Perseus for his first rider, using the same gradual approach they had used for everything else. Grant would lean across the saddle, putting weight on Perseus's back without actually mounting. Then he would lift one leg over, sitting in the saddle but keeping most of his weight in his arms, ready to dismount instantly if needed. Each time, Perseus grew a little more accustomed to the sensation, a little less frightened. Finally, on a warm afternoon with the California sun beating down and a handful of ranch hands gathered to watch, Grant mounted Perseus fully, settling into the saddle and taking the reins in his hands. For one long, tense moment, everyone held their breath. Perseus stood absolutely still, every muscle in his body quivering, his ears flat against his head. Victoria's heart was in her throat, terrified that all their work was about to come undone, that Perseus would explode and hurt Grant or himself. Easy, boy, Grant murmured, his voice calm and steady despite the danger. Easy now. You're all right. We're just going to sit here for a minute, nothing more. Just sit and breathe. Slowly, incrementally, Perseus began to relax. His ears came forward, his muscles loosened, and he turned his head to look back at Grant with one dark, curious eye. "That's it," Grant continued in that same soothing tone. "That's my good boy. You're doing so well." Victoria felt tears streaming down her face, though she hadn't realized she was crying. They had done it. After weeks of patient work, after countless hours of building trust and understanding, Perseus was allowing himself to be ridden. Grant walked Perseus around the corral, keeping the horse at a slow, steady pace, never pushing for more than he was ready to give. The watching ranch hands began to cheer and clap, and even Tom Jenkins, who had been so skeptical at the beginning, was shaking his head in wonder. "I wouldn't have believed it if I hadn't seen it with my own eyes," Tom said to Victoria. "That young lady and Mr. Foster, you two did something special here, something real special." Henry Cooper, the ranch owner, had come out to watch as well, and he approached Victoria with an expression of grudging respect. "Miss Sawyer, I have to admit I thought you were wasting everyone's time, but Grant was right about you. You have a gift for this kind of work. If you're interested, I'd like to talk to you about taking on more responsibility with the horses here at Copper Creek. We get wild horses brought in fairly regularly, and most of them end up being sold off cheap because no one wants to put in the time to gentle them properly. But if you could do with them what you did with this stallion, well, that would be worth something to the ranch and to you." Victoria's heart soared. This was exactly what she had hoped for, the chance to do real work with horses to make a difference. "I'd be very interested in discussing that, Mr. Cooper." "Good. Come by my office tomorrow morning and we'll work out the details." Cooper tipped his hat to her and walked away, already calling out orders to some of the other hands about a different matter. Grant had dismounted from Perseus and was leading him over to where Victoria stood. The stallion was sweating but calm, and he went straight to Victoria, pressing his soft nose against her shoulder as if to say he had done what she wanted, and now he needed comfort. "You were amazing," Victoria told Grant, stroking Perseus's neck with one hand and reaching for Grant with the other. "Both of you were amazing. We couldn't have done it without you," Grant said, his fingers intertwining with hers. "You're the one who saved him, Victoria. You're the one who saw what everyone else missed." They stood there together, the three of them, human and horse, and Victoria felt a sense of completion she had never experienced before. This was what she was meant to do, who she was meant to be. And Grant, if the look in his eyes was any indication, might be who she was meant to be with. Over the following months, Victoria's life transformed in ways she could never have imagined. Mr. Cooper made good on his promise, giving her an official position as a horse trainer and significantly increasing her pay. She moved out of the small cabin she had shared with the kitchen workers and into a slightly larger space near the barns, a little cottage that had been used for storage but which Cooper had cleaned out for her. Grant helped her move her meager possessions, which consisted of 2 dresses, a few books, her father's old curry brush, and a wooden box containing her mother's wedding ring and a faded photograph of her parents on their wedding day. As Grant set the box carefully on the small table in her new cottage, he picked up the photograph, studying it. "Your mother was beautiful," he said softly. "You look like her." "She died when I was 8, Victoria said, taking the photograph from him and tracing her mother's face with one finger. "Fever took her one winter. My father was never the same after. I think that's when he started drinking, trying to drown the grief." "I'm sorry," Grant said, and the genuine compassion in his voice made her throat tight with emotion. "Losing someone you love, it leaves a hole that never quite fills in again. But you learn to live with it," Victoria said, setting the photograph back in the box. You learn to carry the grief and the love together, and eventually you can remember the good times without it hurting quite so much. Grant pulled her into his arms and she leaned against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. They had been courting officially for a few months now, though everyone on the ranch had known they were sweet on each other long before that. Grant was respectful, never pushing her for more than she was ready to give, but the attraction between them was palpable, a constant current that flowed whenever they were in the same space. "I need to tell you something," Grant said after a moment, and something in his tone made Victoria pull back to look at him. "What is it?" "I've been saving money for years, you know that, putting aside every penny I could toward my dream of owning my own ranch." He took a deep breath. "I think I'm close, Victoria. There's a property about 30 miles north of here, good grazing land, a decent house, a barn that needs some work but has good bones. The owner is looking to sell, and I might have just enough to make him an offer." Victoria's heart began to race. "Grant, that's wonderful. That's everything you've wanted." "It would mean leaving Copper Creek," Grant continued, his gray eyes searching hers intently. "It would mean starting over, working dawn to dusk to build up a herd to make the ranch profitable. It would be hard, Victoria. Really hard, especially at first." "I know that," Victoria said, not sure where he was going with this. "What I'm trying to ask, and doing a terrible job of it," Grant said with a rueful smile, "is whether you might want to be part of that future. Whether you might want to come with me, not just as someone who works with the horses, but as my wife, as my partner in everything." Victoria's breath caught. "Grant Foster, are you asking me to marry you?" "I am," Grant said, dropping to one knee right there in her little cottage, taking her hands in his. "I know I should probably have a ring, should do this more formally, but I can't wait another minute to ask. Victoria Sawyer, you're the most extraordinary woman I've ever met. You're strong and compassionate and brave, and you see the best in everyone, even broken horses that everyone else has given up on. I want to spend the rest of my life with you. I want to build a ranch with you, raise horses with you, maybe raise a family with you if you want that. I want to wake up every morning with you beside me and go to sleep every night knowing you're there. Will you marry me?" Tears were streaming down Victoria's face again, but this time they were tears of pure joy. "Yes," she whispered, then louder. "Yes, Grant, yes, I'll marry you. I'll go anywhere with you, do anything with you. Yes." He surged to his feet and swept her into his arms, spinning her around the small cottage as they both laughed with delight. When he set her down, he kissed her with a passion that took her breath away, and she kissed him back with all the love and hope and excitement that was bursting from her heart. They were married a month later in a simple ceremony in San Francisco, with Tom Jenkins and some of the other ranch hands serving as witnesses. Victoria wore a new dress, the first truly nice piece of clothing she had owned since childhood, made of soft blue cotton that brought out the green in her eyes. Grant wore his best suit, and when he saw her walking toward him, his face lit up with such love and admiration that Victoria felt like the most beautiful woman in the world. Mr. Cooper gave them a generous wedding gift, a breeding pair of horses from his herd to help them start building their own stock. And Perseus, the black stallion who had brought them together, was also coming with them. Victoria couldn't imagine leaving him behind, and Grant wouldn't have dreamed of asking her to. The ranch Grant had purchased was called Broken Arrow, named by the previous owner after an old Apache battle that had supposedly taken place on the property decades earlier. It consisted of 200 acres of rolling grassland, a stream that ran year-round, a small but sturdy house with 2 bedrooms, and a barn that could hold a dozen horses with room for expansion. "It's perfect," Victoria breathed when she first saw it, looking out over the land that would be their new home. "It will be," Grant said, his arm around her waist. "With a lot of work and a lot of luck, it will be." They threw themselves into building their ranch with the same dedication Victoria had shown in training Perseus. Grant handled the heavier physical labor, repairing fences and shoring up the barn, while Victoria focused on the horses, training the breeding pair Cooper had given them and working with Perseus to turn him into a breeding stallion. She also began taking in problem horses from neighboring ranches, using the techniques she had developed to help animals that others had written off as too dangerous or too stubborn. Word of her skill spread quickly. Ranchers from all over Northern California began bringing her horses that needed gentling or retraining, and she developed a reputation as someone who could work miracles with difficult animals. The money from her training work, combined with the income from selling their foals and occasionally breeding Perseus to outside mares, meant that Broken Arrow began to turn a profit much faster than either of them had dared hope. But it wasn't easy. There were times when the work felt overwhelming, when Victoria would fall into bed at night so exhausted she could barely move. There were setbacks, horses that didn't respond to her methods as well as she had hoped, a bad winter that killed two of their best foals, a dispute with a neighbor over water rights that nearly turned ugly through it all. Grant was her rock, her partner in every sense of the word. He worked alongside her from dawn to dusk, never complaining, always ready with encouragement or a joke to lighten her mood when things got difficult. And in the quiet moments, in the evenings when they would sit together on the porch of their little house and watch the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson, she fell more in love with him. "You ever regret it?" She asked him one evening, about a year after they had moved to Broken Arrow. "Giving up your position at Copper Creek, taking on all this risk and work." Grant looked at her like she had lost her mind. "Regret marrying you and building this life with you." "Victoria, this is everything I ever wanted and more. How could I possibly regret it? I just worry sometimes that you gave up too much for me." "I didn't give up anything," Grant said firmly, taking her hand in his. "I gained everything. You're my wife, my best friend, my partner. This ranch, what we're building here, it's ours together. That's worth more than any salary or comfortable position ever could be." Victoria leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling the truth of his words settle into her bones. This was happiness, she realized. Not the absence of difficulty or struggle, but the presence of someone to share those struggles with. Someone who made every challenge feel surmountable because you didn't have to face it alone. 2 years after they moved to Broken Arrow, Victoria discovered she was pregnant. The realization came on an ordinary morning when she was in the barn working with a skittish mare someone had brought for training. A wave of dizziness washed over her, followed by nausea, and she had to sit down quickly before she fell down. Grant found her there, pale and shaking, and immediately began to panic. "What's wrong? Are you hurt? Did one of the horses kick you?" "No, I'm fine," Victoria said, though she wasn't sure that was true. "I just felt dizzy suddenly." Grant insisted on taking her into the house and making her rest. And over the next few days, as the nausea continued and her monthly courses failed to arrive, Victoria began to suspect what might be happening. A visit to the doctor in the nearest town confirmed it. She was pregnant, due to deliver sometime in early spring. Grant's reaction when she told him was everything she could have hoped for. He picked her up and spun her around just like he had the day she agreed to marry him, laughing with pure joy. "We're going to have a baby," he kept saying, over and over as if he couldn't quite believe it. "Victoria, we're going to be parents. Are you happy?" she asked, even though she could see the answer written all over his face. "Happy doesn't even begin to cover it," Grant said, cupping her face in his hands. "You're giving me everything, Victoria. A home, a purpose, and now a family. How did I get so lucky?" "I'm the lucky one," Victoria insisted, but Grant just kissed her, silencing her protests. The pregnancy was harder than Victoria had expected. She had always been strong and healthy, never one to complain about aches and pains, but growing a baby took a toll on her body in ways she hadn't anticipated. The nausea lasted well into her 4th month, and as she grew larger, she found it increasingly difficult to do the physical work required to train horses. Grant did everything he could to pick up the slack, taking on more of her training work himself while still managing all his other responsibilities. But Victoria could see the strain it put on him, the exhaustion that lined his face at the end of each long day, and she hated feeling like a burden. "You're not a burden," Grant told her firmly when she tried to express this. "You're carrying our child, Victoria. That's the most important work either of us could be doing right now. Everything else is secondary." Still, she pushed herself harder than she probably should have, determined not to let their clients down, not to lose the reputation she had worked so hard to build. It was during one of these moments, when she was 7 months pregnant, and trying to work with a particularly fractious gelding, that disaster struck. The gelding reared without warning, his front hooves striking out, and Victoria, slower than usual because of her pregnancy, couldn't get out of the way in time. One hoof caught her on the shoulder, sending her sprawling to the ground, and she landed hard on her side. The pain was immediate and excruciating, and for one terrifying moment she thought she was losing the baby. Grant came running at the sound of her scream, and when he saw her on the ground, his face went white. "Don't move," he ordered, dropping to his knees beside her. "Victoria, where are you hurt? Is it the baby?" "I don't know," she gasped, one hand pressed to her swollen belly. "Grant, I'm scared." "I'm taking you to the doctor," Grant said, his voice shaking. "Right now." He carried her to the wagon and drove like a madman to town, holding her as carefully as he could while still pushing the horses to their limit. By the time they reached the doctor's office, Victoria was crying from pain and fear, convinced that her stubbornness and pride had cost her child its life. The doctor examined her carefully, checking her injuries and listening for the baby's heartbeat with his stethoscope. The minutes ticked by with agonizing slowness while Victoria and Grant clung to each other, waiting for a verdict that would determine their entire future. Finally, the doctor straightened and gave them a small smile. "The baby's heartbeat is strong and steady. I don't think there's been any harm done there. As for you, Mrs. Foster, you have a badly bruised shoulder and some bruised ribs, but nothing's broken. You were very lucky." The relief was so overwhelming that Victoria burst into tears, and Grant wasn't far behind. They held each other while the doctor tactfully busied himself with preparing a salve for Victoria's bruises, giving them a moment to collect themselves. "But," the doctor continued once they had calmed down, his tone serious, "you need to be more careful, Mrs. Foster. No more working with unpredictable horses, not until after the baby is born. You're in the final months now and your balance is off, your reflexes are slower. What happened today could have been much worse." "I know," Victoria whispered, feeling ashamed and foolish. "I just didn't want to let Grant down, didn't want to be useless." "You could never be useless," Grant said fiercely, still holding her hand tight enough to hurt. "And I would much rather lose every client we have than lose you or our baby. Do you understand me, Victoria? Nothing, and I mean nothing, is worth that risk." She nodded, too choked up to speak. True to her promise, Victoria stepped back from the hands-on-horse training for the remainder of her pregnancy. It was frustrating, watching Grant work with the horses she used to handle, giving him instructions from the sidelines when what she really wanted to do was get in the ring herself. But every time she felt tempted to do more than she should, she remembered the terror of thinking she might have hurt her baby, and she stayed put. Grant was endlessly patient with her frustration, never complaining when she snapped at him out of irritation with her own limitations, always ready with a kind word or a gentle reminder that this was temporary, that she would be back to work soon enough. Their son was born on a rainy March morning in 1881, arriving with a lusty cry that echoed through their small house. The birth was long and difficult, and there were moments when Victoria thought she wouldn't survive it, but Grant was there the entire time, holding her hand, wiping her forehead, whispering encouragement and love. When the midwife finally placed the squirming, red-faced infant in Victoria's arms, she felt a rush of love so powerful it nearly stopped her heart. This tiny person, with his shock of dark hair and his father's nose, was theirs, hers and Grant's, created from their love. "He's perfect," Grant whispered, tears streaming unashamedly down his face as he looked at his son. "Victoria, he's absolutely perfect." They named him Gabriel after Grant's father, and from the moment he entered the world, he had both his parents wrapped around his tiny finger. Grant was a devoted father, waking up for nighttime feedings even though Victoria was nursing, changing diapers without complaint, spending hours just holding Gabriel and staring at him in wonder. "I never knew I could love someone this much," Grant confessed one night, cradling their sleeping son against his chest. "I thought what I felt for you was the biggest love I could feel, but it's different. It doesn't diminish what I feel for you at all, it just adds to it, like my heart got bigger somehow." "I know exactly what you mean," Victoria said softly, watching her husband and son together and feeling so grateful for her life that it almost hurt. As Gabriel grew from an infant to a toddler, the ranch continued to thrive. Victoria gradually returned to her training work, though she was more careful now, more aware of the risks. She also discovered that she loved teaching, and she began offering lessons to local ranch hands and cowboys who wanted to learn her gentling techniques. Grant expanded their herd, buying stock from established ranches and breeding selectively for horses that were strong, smart, and even tempered. Perseus, now middle-aged for a stallion, had become a legend in the area, known for producing foals with exceptional qualities. People came from as far away as Los Angeles to breed their mares to him. When Gabriel was 3, Victoria found out she was pregnant again. This time, the pregnancy was easier, perhaps because she knew what to expect, perhaps because she was more willing to accept help and limitations. Their second child, a daughter they named Grace, was born during the warm days of October, arriving quickly and easily compared to her brother's dramatic entrance. With 2 children, life at Broken Arrow became even busier. But it was a good kind of busy, the kind that came from a life filled with purpose and love. Gabriel, even at his young age, showed signs of having inherited his mother's gift with horses, and he could often be found in the barns, talking to the animals in his sweet, piping voice. "He's going to be a horse trainer like his mama," Grant predicted, watching their son carefully offer Perseus a piece of apple under Victoria's supervision. "Maybe," Victoria said, smiling at the sight. "Or maybe he'll want to do something completely different. Either way, we'll support him." "Of course we will," Grant agreed. "Though I have to admit, I like the idea of him carrying on what we've built here." They stood together on the porch of their house, which Grant had expanded over the years to accommodate their growing family, and looked out over their land. The ranch was beautiful in the evening light, the hills rolling away toward the horizon, the horses grazing peacefully in the pastures, smoke rising from the chimney of the bunkhouse where they now employed 3 full-time ranch hands. "You remember the night we met?" Victoria asked, leaning into Grant's side. "When you found me in the corral with Perseus." "I remember thinking I must be dreaming," Grant said, wrapping his arm around her. This beautiful woman, standing in the moonlight with a horse everyone said was a killer, and he was eating out of her hand like a gentle pet. "I knew right then that you were special, that you were going to change my life." "You changed mine too," Victoria said softly. "Before I met you, I was just trying to survive, just getting through each day. But you helped me see that I could have more, that I could build something meaningful. You believed in me before I believed in myself." "You already had the gift," Grant corrected. "I just recognized it." "You're the one who saved Perseus, Victoria. You're the one who built this training program, who developed these techniques that people come from all over to learn. I'm proud to be your husband, but I also know that you would have succeeded with or without me." "Maybe," Victoria conceded, "but I wouldn't have been as happy. Success doesn't mean much if you don't have someone to share it with." Grant kissed the top of her head, and they stood together in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over their ranch, their children playing nearby, their horses grazing contentedly in the distance. Years passed, and life continued to unfold at Broken Arrow. Gabriel grew into a thoughtful, capable young man who did indeed inherit his mother's gift with horses, while Grace surprised everyone by showing more interest in the business side of the ranch, keeping meticulous records of breeding lines and sales figures by the time she was 12. Victoria and Grant expanded the ranch again, buying the adjacent property when it came up for sale, and they began breeding cattle alongside their horses, diversifying their income streams. They also started a program to train young people who wanted to learn horse training, essentially creating a school that drew students from across California and beyond. Perseus lived to the remarkable age of 28, producing quality foals until the very end. When he finally died, peacefully in his sleep one winter night, Victoria mourned him like a family member. Grant found her in the barn, sitting beside the stallion's still form, tears streaming down her face. "He was the beginning of everything," she said, her voice thick with grief. "If it wasn't for Perseus, we never would have met. We wouldn't have this life." "Then we owe him everything," Grant said, sitting down beside her and pulling her into his arms. "And we'll make sure he's remembered. Every horse we train, every technique we teach, it all started with you and Perseus." That's his legacy. They buried Perseus on a hill overlooking the ranch, marking his grave with a simple stone that read, "Perseus, the black stallion who changed everything." For years afterward, Victoria would ride up to that hill when she needed to think or when she wanted to feel close to the horse that had given her so much. Gabriel took over more and more of the daily operations of the ranch as Grant and Victoria got older, though neither of them ever truly retired. Victoria continued to work with special cases, the horses that no one else could reach, and Grant remained involved in the breeding program and the business decisions. When Gabriel was 25, he married a young woman named Sarah, a skilled rider who shared his passion for horses, and they gave Victoria and Grant their first grandchild, a bright-eyed boy they named Grant after his grandfather. Grace, meanwhile, had become one of the most respected horse breeders in California, known for her keen eye for bloodlines and her business acumen. Did you ever imagine this? Victoria asked Grant one evening as they sat on their porch, now in their 50s, watching their grandchildren play in the yard while their children worked with horses in the corrals. "Back when we were just starting out, did you ever dream we'd have all this?" Grant considered the question carefully. "I dreamed of having my own ranch," he said slowly. I dreamed of success, of financial security. But this, a family, grandchildren, a legacy that will continue after we're gone. People coming from everywhere to learn techniques my wife pioneered. No, I never imagined anything this good. You exceeded every dream I ever had, Victoria Foster. We did it together, Victoria said firmly. Every bit of this we built together. We did, Grant agreed, and I'd do it all again in a heartbeat. Every struggle, every setback, every triumph. All of it led to this moment, to this life. Victoria thought about the scared, desperate woman she had been when she first arrived at Copper Creek Ranch. How she had been just trying to survive, just trying to get through each day. She thought about Perseus, the broken stallion everyone had given up on, and how saving him had really been about saving herself. She thought about Grant, the man who had seen her gift when she was still learning to see it herself, who had loved her and supported her and built this beautiful life alongside her. You told me I had a gift, she said, remembering that night so long ago when he had found her in the corral. You were the first person who ever really saw that in me. And I was right, Grant said with a smile. You do have a gift, Victoria, a gift for healing, for understanding, for seeing the best in everyone and everything. That gift has changed lives, both human and animal. It certainly changed mine. As the sun set over Broken Arrow Ranch, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and gold, Victoria reached for her husband's hand. His fingers intertwined with hers automatically, the gesture as natural and familiar as breathing after nearly 3 decades of marriage. She looked at their joined hands, both work-worn and calloused, marked by years of labor and love, and she felt a profound sense of gratitude for the journey that had brought her here. From poverty and loss to abundance and family, from desperation to purpose, from a broken horse in a corral to a legacy that would last for generations. I love you, she said simply, the words she had spoken countless times but which never lost their meaning. I love you too, Grant replied, his gray eyes still as warm and adoring as they had been the first time he had said those words. Today, tomorrow, and every day after that, for as long as we both shall live. And that, Victoria thought, was the greatest gift of all. Not the success of the ranch, not the recognition or the financial security, but this man beside her, this partnership they had forged through patience and trust and unwavering commitment. Just like training a horse, building a marriage and a life together required dedication, compassion, and the willingness to keep trying even when things got difficult. As darkness fell over the ranch and the stars began to emerge in the vast California sky, Victoria and Grant remained on their porch, hands still clasped together, watching over the land and the family and the legacy they had built. In the corrals below, horses whinnied softly to each other, settling in for the night. In the house behind them, their grandchildren's laughter echoed through the rooms. And in their hearts, the love that had started with a broken horse and a cowboy who saw something special continued to burn bright, a beacon that had guided them through decades and would continue to light their way until the very end. Gabriel came up to the porch carrying little Grant, who had fallen asleep on his shoulder. We're heading home, he said quietly. Same time tomorrow for that new mare that came in. Same time, Victoria confirmed, standing to kiss her grandson's cheek and then her son's. Drive safely. After Gabriel and his family had departed, and Grace had retreated to her own cottage on the property with a stack of breeding records to review, Victoria and Grant finally went inside their house. It was the same house they had moved into as newlyweds, though expanded and improved over the years, and every corner held memories. Grant banked the fire in the fireplace while Victoria checked that all the windows were secure. their nighttime routine unchanged after all these years. When they finally climbed into bed, Grant pulled Victoria close and she rested her head on his chest, listening to his steady heartbeat. "Thank you," she whispered into the darkness. "For what?" Grant asked, his hand gently stroking her hair. "For believing in me. For seeing me when I felt invisible. For building this life with me. For everything. Victoria, you never have to thank me for loving you. It's the easiest thing I've ever done." She tilted her face up to kiss him, a gentle press of lips that conveyed 3 decades of devotion and intimacy. When she settled back against his chest, she felt completely at peace, completely content with the life they had created together. Outside, the wind whispered through the grass, and somewhere in the distance, a horse nickered softly. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new horses to train, new lessons to teach, but tonight was for rest, for gratitude, for the quiet joy of a life well lived with the person you loved most. As Victoria drifted off to sleep, her last conscious thought was of Perseus, the magnificent black stallion who had been the catalyst for everything. She hoped that wherever horses went after death, he was running free across endless plains, wild and beautiful and finally at peace. And she hoped he knew, somehow, that the gift he had given her, the chance to prove herself and find her purpose and meet the man who would become her everything, had rippled out into the world in ways that would continue long after she was gone. The story of a woman who tamed a horse everyone else had given up on, and the cowboy who recognized her gift, had become a love story for the ages, passed down through generations of the foster family and the countless students Victoria trained over her lifetime. It was a story about patience and compassion, about seeing potential where others saw only problems, about building trust one moment at a time, and about how the right partnership, whether between human and horse or between 2 people who loved each other deeply, could overcome any obstacle and create something truly extraordinary.